welcome to the Royal College of Speech and Language Therapy webinar about a deep dive into the pre-registration eating, drinking and swallowing competencies framework. There are a raft of webinars. This is one of 4 in a series, which is really looking to address the implementation of this competency framework, which is really for pre-registration students and apprentices. We call them learners now. This is the best language for it. And it's really not about EDS practice per se, but about how to educate our future workforce to be competent when qualified as new practitioners. Next slide, please. In case you haven't known who I am, I introduce myself. I'm Judith Broll. I'm the Director of Professional Development at the Royal College of Speech and Language Therapists. I am a dysphagia speech and language therapist by background, having worked for many years as a clinical advisor in this area, and also as a manager who has been trying to recruit and train new grads in to be able to work in EDS. And I think this piece of work is very timely and very close to my heart. It's something that I think is a really important step forward for us as a profession. Next slide, please. I think in terms of what we are here to do today, we are coming on to that. But if anybody has any problems, technical issues, please could you get in touch with some of our colleagues on the call via the chat function, which you should find at the bottom of your screen. I also would like to know that if you have any questions, please could you use the Q&A button and we will address them later on after the presentation. This event is being recorded, and I'm going to, then they'll be available on the college website along with the slides once the presentation has been completed. You will also receive an evaluation at the end, and I also think that if you've got any other queries or any feedback, we would love to hear from it. I can see some messages coming in about sound. I apologise if people can't hear me. There is a real problem at my end potentially, but I will keep going unless I'm told to stop otherwise. Could I please have the next slide, please? I think this is really just a bit of a context setting slide, and apologies for those who have seen it before, because I think this piece of work really was something of aligned information that came at the right time. Just after I started in this role in November 2019, I was sent to America to meet my colleagues who are part of the Mutual Recognition Agreement, which is a group of professional bodies who deliver speech and language therapy programs in English across the world. And we meet and touch base about what is happening, any new initiatives, and how to just to ensure that there is robust agreement around consistency of training, so that when pre-COVID therapists wanted to travel the world, we knew that they could then come and work in one of our agreed countries. And one of the things that was really highlighted by our colleagues was that UK trained speech and language therapists really were an outlier in the fact that we could not evidence that eating, drinking and swallowing was trained upon, and that there was any competency around graduates coming out. So I was tasked to come back to this country and to think about how we might be able to align with our colleagues to ensure that there is clarity of purpose. Then, unfortunately for all of the world, COVID-19 hit. I don't need to say much more about that, but I think one of the very few silver linings is it really shone a light on the added value of having speech and language therapists with the skill set we do have around eating, drinking, swallowing and communication to support very sick patients with COVID initially, and then, as we know, this new evolving long COVID piece. I had very early discussions and negotiations with Health Education England, and really even pre-COVID, but actually because of COVID, we've managed to secure some funding, which is absolutely clear is for all the UK, all 4 nations, to help deliver this competency framework for all pre-registration clinicians in whichever organisation they are trained. As part of COVID, to help support membership, everybody, all of us, we undertook a survey quite early on in the pandemic. just about what it is we could do to support, especially in around the space of dysphagia. And the feedback was overwhelming. Yes, please, can we have some training support for everybody, but also for clinicians who hadn't got the pre-registration training under their belt, who might be able to come into the space in all the redeployment piece, but also for other professions as well to understand what we can do in this space. And please, can we have that training now? So we really listened, and I think because of all these things coming together, we really appreciated that we needed to get on and do this work. It took a bit longer than anticipated, but actually in the scheme of stuff, I think we've turned it around pretty quickly. And this final quote is really just something that I think one of our colleagues said while we were talking about it quite early on, and I thought it was quite apposite, that as a profession, we are obligated to deliver entry-level eating, drinking and swallowing competencies to ensure we optimise safe patient care within 21st century education, health and social care environment. So could I have my next slide, please? So what does that mean in practice? It's all very well saying we've got this money, now what happens? I was really clear that if we were going to do this, we needed to do it well. And we needed to be really robust and transparent in how we manage this process and to get the right people in the room to help make this project work to be successful. And the first thing we need to do is to get a framework together against which we are going to work. So we use the normal project process and we put out an ask and a tender, if you like, put it that way, for applications to join the working group. With my clinical head on, really, I thought, you know what, we really need to make sure that this process works for the whole of the profession. This is a real generation change in how we train, and this is the identity of the profession and owning eating, drinking and swallowing. To do that, we needed to ensure that there was an academic element to this, but also a clinical element, and they land together and work hand in glove so that whatever framework we put together, it would work for both academic and clinical colleagues. As a result of which, we put out a request for 2 lead authors, an academic lead author and a clinical lead author, and under that we were going to have a clinical and academic representative from one of each of the 4 nations, and we have photo fits of them on my next slide, which I think is really important for you to see, to really identify that these are real life people who wrote this fabulous document. The working group was recruited, and they have been worked extremely hard, but because of such a high caliber of applicants for the roles, we thought we can't lose all these fabulous people, and we put together an advisory group to support the working group, to sense check what we were saying, and also to think about what else we might have missed, and they've been really valuable in this process. The draft of this, sorry, can I go back to the slide before, please? Sorry. This was consulted on to all members in January this year, and in response to what needed to be changed, the final draft was that the final competency framework was delivered in February this year. And as a result of which, we are now in an implementation phase. We're having lots of ongoing conversations with all of you, with colleagues, both in health in HEIs and in clinical placements, to make sure this works. This has to work for everybody. And we've just had a lot of communications, which has been really valuable and rich, especially with academics in particular. And I'm really excited to start looking now more to work with clinicians on the ground delivering. Could I have the next slide now, please? So this is our fabulous group of a working group who put together this this framework. I think we were really delighted to be working with them, because although some of them are clinical and some of them are academic, they are actually clinical academics. So a lot of them have fingers or feet in both camps. And I think what that did is it helped us land the whole document to make it fit for purpose, and we can challenge each other both from an academic and a clinical background. So there were some very robust conversations that we had, and we worked them really hard. We were there in our Christmas jumpers, literally on Christmas Eve, to get this done, and I think that's really important to know. So I'd really like it on record once again to thank all these people for all their hard work and dedication. And I'm delighted that we have one of the lead authors with us today who's going to just talk us through the evolution in a bit more. So can I please hand over to Paula now? Thank you.
So hello folk, I have quite a grand title there, consultant scholar. I must explain that. I don't actually work for a university, I don't work for RCSLT, but I needed to put a title in when I had to do some review online, and and they wouldn't accept I don't have an affiliation, so I made that up. All right, let's just get that out of the way. It doesn't mean anything fancy. So I qualified in 95 when dysphagia wasn't on the menu as such in terms of our education, but it was definitely something from my first day at work I had to do. I had no interest in it. It was, you know, not on my radar at all, but in working in both pediatric and adult settings, it's a part of the life of many of the people that we serve in our clinical worlds. So I then did end up doing loads of stuff in eating, drinking and swallowing, as some of you may know, and I was delighted and slightly scared about being involved in this quite weighty document. But one of the principles behind this thing is about evidencing what we already do, and I'll explain a little bit more about that in a moment. So this is not desperately new stuff. In 2015, the framework around dysphagia training and competency came out, and I can criticize that document as well as praise it, because I was very involved in writing it. And there was a big committee of people with lots of expertise from all sorts of areas, drew this document together, and there's great stuff in there, but there's also places where it's just not as clear as it could be. And I think we were only just getting to grips with what competencies really look like. It's a word a bit like information governance that was bandied around a lot, but nobody really knows what it means. And we have a much clearer idea of what a competency is now. So it was a good idea that we would start within education, early education of the pre-reg students, and have a framework right up to the super specialists, some of whom have been honoured by the Queen this year, let's face it, which is fantastic. So I feel that it's good for that post-basic stuff, but for the pre-reg and the just turning into the NQPs, there's a lack of clarity, as I say here, around signing off competencies, which was reflected in supervisors not wanting to sign off competencies because it wasn't clear exactly what they were signing off. And then it basically lacks teeth. So it was recommended that certain things should happen by the end of people's university education. And a lot of the knowledge was covered, but a lot of the practical stuff was not covered for a variety of reasons. And the other document that people ask about is the interprofessional framework. So that's a very different document, and you've got screenshots of the two documents here, and the interprofessional one I've put in brackets not for SLTs. That looks at the whole of the health and social care workforce, and it's a great document, and it looks at all sorts of people involved in supporting clients and families with eating, drinking and swallowing issues, but it's not really the progression document for speech and language therapists. So we're not aligning to fit with that. We are reviewing, we were supposed to review the dysphagia training competency framework in 2017, and that hasn't quite happened, but we started with the pre-reg bit, and we're very aware that lots of services use that DTCF document to structure their lifelong learning within the service, and we're certainly going to work on that and fit the pre-reg, this new document, into that. So we haven't lost sight of that. I hope that allays some fears. I felt it was really important to not reinvent wheels, and to look at the massive amount. Remember, I said it's about evidencing what we already do, not coming in with an entirely new area of our skill set, like, you know, when video fluoroscopy came in, when endoscopy came in, when all sorts of other bits and pieces are coming in. This is not about extending our practice. Are we getting noise interference? Yes, no. Need a quick signal, folk. I'm hearing a drill from next door. I'll keep going. That's, yeah.
Sorry. I'm not sure what we can do about it because it is an environmental challenge. Shall we keep trying, Paula, excuse me, and hope that the drill doesn't get any louder?
Let's see. If I need to pause, I'm going to run next door. Like, I'm just going to pause. Judith, can you just talk through about HCPCs? I'm going to ask them to stop for 30 minutes, all right?
This is the real world of what you do when you're doing everything online. So I think what Paula wanted just to mention, and she will do it much better than I will, is that we wanted to make this as easy as possible for everybody, so there were no surprises. And we needed to pull together as many of the current documents that we all look at when we look at education of our workforce. And HCPCs was something really key to this, because we want to keep it as a carrot, not a stick. We spoke to HCPC quite early on, and the Council of Deans, just to say, well, what do we need to do if we're actually changing the curriculum and how that works? How are we going to be able to evidence this, or what do we need? And HCPC was saying, well, the SOPs are changing in 2025. So if we can do something to get some SOPs in place for them, we can work around that and work backwards. So that's why this is another of these stars aligning in a way, is that we can then try and deliver this training on our timeline, which will then lead into something very positive, and would be no surprises by the time the HCPC SOPs comes in board and we have to then evidence our work against it. That's perfect timing, Paula. How does that sound?
Brilliant. We had it, you know, that sharp intake of breath that workmen do with the pencil behind the ear. All right, 20 minutes, love. All right, you got it. Okay, so we've already got this framework, the HCPC SOPs, which many of you will be familiar with. The Irish framework, IASLT, is the Irish Association of Speech and Language Therapy, were kind enough to share their existing document. So we've got a structure, and we thought there's no point in making a new one when our lovely neighbours over the ocean there are prepared to share what they've got that's already acceptable around the world. And in looking through that document, there was an awful lot that basically is what people do within the 4 nations of the UK. We just don't evidence it. And so that's why I've said our aim as the working group was more about evidencing what we already do than introducing a load of new stuff. And since September 2015, this comes from that dysphagia training competency framework. Universities, HEIs in the UK, have really been working hard at getting a lot of content around eating, drinking and swallowing issues into educational programs, and that's great. And we have these HCPC standards of proficiency from 2014, but we also have curriculum guidance that came out in 2018. And so in drawing up this document, I trawled the curriculum guidance, and it says there forthcoming 2021, because we had to add a couple of minor tweaks in language to make sure 3 documents, which I'll explain in a moment, just had the same kind of vocabulary and sense to them. So 2018, this massive curriculum guidance comes out, which many in the clinical communities won't have noticed, because it was again really codifying stuff that was already how HEIs worked. So for every place I could find something that would fit with the knowledge and competency box on the left-hand side of the screen there, I put it in this document, and I did the same for the HCPC SOPs, so that our poor folk in the HEIs wouldn't freak out when we say, oh, we need all this stuff, now you go and find where it is. So for almost all of the areas of competency, and I think there's 25, 26 of them, we have stuff populated. Interestingly, there'd be the odd little anomaly, like anatomy and physiology of the head and neck is not actually mentioned in our curriculum guidance. But let's face it, there's no program in the world in speech and language therapy that wouldn't address anatomy and physiology of the head and neck, right? That's what we do. But again, it was about evidencing it. And the way that can be addressed is simply by changing some of the wording in a module's description or an assessment's description, not requiring a whole load of new learning. So I think very much about clinic and classroom, and for the 12 years I was in the USA, I worked with master students. That's the equivalent of our pre-reg in speech language pathology and in audiology in counselling. And I would think very much they'd be in clinic all day and would come into class at night. That's just how the programme was organised in Pittsburgh. But with 3 components in professional education, whether you're an engineer, whether you're a speech language pathologist, speech language therapist or whatever, you've got issues that need to be codified within curriculum guidance. That was one of the documents I referred to. So that's the 2018 document. Then there's the practice-based learning guidance, which has just come out this year as well, which I think of as the Joe Sanderford and team document. And then there's the eating, drinking and swallowing document. And we went backwards and forwards between these 3 documents many, many times over the months to make sure that we were aligning and supporting things, because we don't want to confuse people when documents don't say quite the same thing. I find that, you know, quite disturbing. And as I said, professional learning, whatever discipline you're in, has these 3 components. So there's a chunk of stuff we have to know, right? But then there's a chunk of stuff that we have to be able to do, and knowledge and competency are very different. And the third really important area in any professional training is exposure to the people that we're working with, whether it's banking clients, you know, structural engineers, our service users, clients and families. So knowledge can be largely got at through academic programs. Competency, depending on what your competency is, can be perfectly well addressed in a classroom setting, or might need to be addressed in a clinic setting. And we're going to share documents around those in subsequent webinars and communications, explaining that a bit more. But the exposure component is the one that I'm really interested in and really defensive about. And that is simply spending time with the people that your profession serves. So I used to give my students in Pittsburgh an example, because we had lots, it was a very competitive program, lots of people with the equivalent of like A triple star A levels and all the rest of it. And I'd say, you know, think about it yourselves, getting into a plane. I don't want to get into a plane with a guy or a girl or a person who's read all the manuals, scored really high on all the practical, all the theoretical exams, but's never actually flown a plane, taken off a runway, flown around through the clouds and landed on another runway, right? I'd accept the C grade person on the books, but who's done a lot more flying. And we can never replicate that just hanging out with human beings and their unpredictability and their vulnerability. Remember, they come to us in times of need, in any of the other ways that we beautifully assess education. And all these components support each other, right? We can't, as professionals, do 2 or 1 of the 3 and expect to turn out qualified professionals. And it also leads us into lifelong learning. So practice-based experience, and you'll have to excuse me and Judith, we're so long kicking around this profession that we get, you know, clinical supervision, placements, practicum, they call them in USA. We try to keep up with the appropriate vocabulary, so forgive us if we miss it. But think of all the conditions that we support and have always supported for 100 years as a profession, or 76 as a recognised professional body. Neurological, congenital, acquired, developmental, that lead to communication issues. Almost all of them may, for a given individual, have associated issues around eating, drinking and swallowing in its broadest sense. And some of the points on this slide have come from our discussions with clinicians and with students and with academics. And I really like these phrases. We view it as a pre-registration taster of the phenomenal breadth of our practice. I mean, when I was working at a certain university designing a speech and language therapy program, compared to some of the other disciplines, I had to argue really hard for why we needed linguists on the staff and clinicians and people who deal with sound, physics, in a way that OT and physio don't, right? Much as I love those professions. So we have a real breadth. Not everybody's going to want to go on and do absolutely everything. We know that. And I'm sure you've experienced as academics and or clinicians that learners often change their area of interest. They come into their studies wanting to definitely work with little kids in preschool, and they go out wanting to do support people with head and neck cancer and tracheostomies, and vice versa, of course. And these are 2 comments that came from clinical educator employers here, that what they would love is that they would employ newly qualified, you know, just out of school graduates who were not completely at scratch in any particular area. They didn't have to know much about any particular area, but at least they weren't completely terrified, deer in the headlights, when you said, okay, now we're going to look at someone who needs an AAC support system, or now we're going to look at someone who has some eating, drinking and swallowing issues. And then this one came just last week, that placement supervisors are potential employers. And that was absolutely the case when I worked in the USA, that your last couple of placements, you know, people were checking you out for a potential employee. And that's a great thing that we have in our practical experience. So just to give you a couple of screenshots from our existing information, the first is that our mission statement is very simply that we create better lives for people with communication and swallowing needs. That's it, bottom line. And I think that's a fantastic professional mission statement. And then the second shot here, who benefits from speech and language therapy? It's taken from a document that's on the website and provided to potential students. You know, what is it that a speech and language therapist does? And these are our marketing materials. And for some time now, we have said that we support people who may have eating, drinking, and swallowing disorders. So people coming into the professions know this. This is part of our general marketing stuff. And again, you just look down that list and you're looking at the great range of conditions that people may experience that are going to require us to support them in eating, drinking, and swallowing and communication. Those two things are almost never separate. Back to Judith.
Thank you, Paula. That was really helpful. I learn every time I listen to you, but I think you're right. Next slide from me, thank you. I think something that is really key to what we do in this is to think about what it is they're coming out with. If we think about what, Paula, you were just talking about, is what the framework is and how the context of the other pieces of work that are already being used in the system, especially the competency framework for postgrads. There were some questions about, well, what is it that this crew is coming out with? There is clearly no way that we will be able to get, and nor should we be able to say that new grads will be coming out competent at old school level C, because that takes time and it takes additional training. So I think what we are writing, and we're just finalising now, is supporting guidance about what the endpoint expectations of this framework is, so that every future employer and practice placement deliverer will know what to expect, irrespective of which organisation the new grad has come from, will have the same level of exposure to eating, drinking and swallowing. And what that will do is give us and you as clinicians a really clear idea about what future development that new grad will need to get them right for what you need. So clearly we're not going to suggest that they come out being able to go and work on NICU or assess tracheostomy care or what to do with head and neck cancer or how to manage a complex child with autism and EDS issues. This is about everybody coming out with a really clear exposure to eating, drinking and swallowing as part of the holistic context of managing their caseload, wherever that may be. If you think about it, this is something that we've been talking about a lot with the working group, is that all NQPs require supervision. So how, example, would you be able to evidence the levels of competency anybody has in managing communication disorders? And that's no different from what we're saying around EDS. They will need ongoing support, supervision and training in that area. And I think we are also aligning with the current NQP competency framework. So there'll be no different in that. And then we can look and see how we are going to manage it from there. We know that this is a continuum of learning, and all we are doing, it sounds very easy when I say this, it really isn't, is moving the start line from when we start training our EDS workforce from post-registration to pre-registration, so that everybody has an overview of where they're starting from. But absolutely, we'll need future support. Next slide, please. So what happens next? We have been talking to huge numbers of you, and I think we will be talking to even more of you, we hope, in the next few months. And we know that we need to put some more information in place. Before the webinar, we have sent you quite a lot of information. We've sent you another copy of the EDS framework. We've sent you videos from our Health HEE AHP lead, Bev Harden, and from us just to do some context setting. And we've also sent you the frequently asked questions that we've already addressed. But there are some other documents that we're working on, and we just needed to cite you on it because we thought that'd be quite helpful in this forum. Let's use it, let's spread the word as wide as we can. We're finalising a document about the definition of what counts as an hour to EDS exposure, because we think that's something that we needed just to bottom out with you all. And we're going to talk about that in more detail. This is a plug on one of our next webinars. We also know there are 20 competencies. Not all of them need to be signed off, whatever that means, face to face, but some of them, to coin a Paula phrase, is you need to do it on a real human. So we are articulating which of these competencies need to be signed off, and for the clinicians on this call, these are the ones I think you might need to be really cited on, need to be achieved in the clinic, on the ground, with a real live living breathing person, and the others can be done in a different format if needs be, which I will come on to in a minute. And then, as I was just saying, the endpoint expectations document is the third one that we are really keen to get out now before the next webinars. Just circling back slightly, we are also investigating how at a national level we can track and log the EDS hours so that it is not a cumbersome piece of work. We know we need hours because we need a way to evidence that this is done right across every area of the students' learning. And we're looking to see how we can do that with one format for everybody to make it as easy as possible. And this is a huge piece of work because we need to talk to all of you. So we are also recruiting another project coordinator to support the next implementation phase. And part of that, a really important part of that, is to help with the scoping, the tender and delivery of the simulation resources, which was one of the prerequisite funding pots from Health Education England when we got this first bid. So there are really creative ways, and I'm really already struck by how creative clinicians have been in trying to deliver these frameworks. And simulation is something we can't shy away from. As a Luddite here, even I'm trying to embrace it. And I think there are huge benefits to all of this. And I think it's really important that we do that bit properly. So that's something that's coming out. We're going to look and to develop communities of practice so we can all learn from each other. We're all in this together. So why reinvent wheels if people around the country might be slightly more ahead than where you are, or vice versa, you've got something you'd like to share. Let's all get you together to talk about all of that. And other implementation support, which I have no doubt will appear as we go along. Next one, please. I'll give you a picture. I thought that might be quite nice. Longer term, we know that this is just the beginning. This is not just a project we deliver. We're starting it with the universities teaching against this framework from the cohort of students starting this September 2021, with the first lot, if you like, coming out ready to go from about 24, 25, depending on the project, the course that these students start on, probably 25, and by 2026 everybody will come out with that. There is some tail on it because some courses clearly will need more time to deliver against it, and that's fine because everybody, there is some variance across the nations, and I think we really respect that. But I think what I'm really keen to do, as you may have appreciated by now, is to make sure that that the career pathways really reflect our new rebadged piece of work around EDS being key and core to all training. And we now therefore know, having said that, we're moving the goalposts, if you like, back into pre-reg training. We're going to have to go back and review, a late review, as Paula was saying, it was meant to be done in 2017, the current college dysphagia training and competency framework. And I think we need to be really mindful of what is coming out nationally and how we can really embed that with the current other things, for example, the pillars of practice, and how we can evidence specialist areas as well as generic areas. But that is a piece of work we're going to start probably early next year. We know it needs to come. We're mindful that it needs to be done, but we need to really focus on the support for getting this up running and everybody understands it now. Next slide, please. So we're going to stop talking in a minute. I promise to be delighted to hear the end of me, I'm sure, but I just wanted to to just alert you to the other webinars that we've got planned for the next 3 Thursdays. And we're hoping that if we can't answer your questions today, that they will be covered in more detail and depth in these following webinars. So next week, we're looking at how to implement practice placements with EDS difficulties. The next one is about signing off practical competencies. And the last one is around how to find opportunities for paediatric placements. And I think that's all I have to say from me. So can we go to the next slide? And my colleagues and I have been working hard to come up with some questions. So thank you so much for the questions that have come in through the chat. What I'm going to suggest is if I start with some of them, and then I'll hand some of them over to Paula, if I may. Just looking through my chat here, so apologies for 1 minute. Can't find where they are. Here we are. So we had one question about what will we do to help support finding the placements and the placement hours. And we have been working extremely closely with all universities to ensure that this won't be a problem, or if it is, we know it's a challenge finding placements anywhere. And I think if we go back to what Paula was saying, it's about expanding placement opportunities across the board. We're thinking about this in the most creative and diverse ways, and I think we're going to cover that in more details in future webinars, but we are confident that working together between the HEIs and the clinicians on the ground delivering that, it will be something that will be able to be achieved, and it's an evolving piece, and we'll be reviewing that. The next question I might hand over to you, Paula, is that there's somebody who is in the middle of their dysphagia training now, and we wondered how this framework will impact on that. Are you there, or have you frozen? I have a horrible feeling you might have frozen, in which case, oh no, she's back, I think. Are you there?
I am, but I didn't hear. I'm hearing you intermittently, Judith.
Apologies, it's probably my sound, which I need to sort out. There was a question about somebody who's in the middle of their postgraduate dysphagia training at the moment and wants to know whether this framework will impact on them.
No, this is pre-reg work, and if I do strongly encourage people to read the documents, you'll see that it's very basic stuff that we're asking to codify an evidence rather than new stuff that we're asking people to learn, meaning that a lot of this is already in the programs that people were trained in the last possibly 5 to 10 years. So we're mindful, which kind of may link to another question, of how this is also going to fit into the post-reg training. And again, it may not be a radical change at all for that kind of level C, which was sort of, you've got to have the knowledge, but we're not sure about the competencies depending on where you're placed in placement. And that's part of the grey area problem that we have. So I see it as not affecting people who are currently doing training at all. And for those of you like me who trained quite a while ago, just to head this question off at the pass, we're not expecting everybody to suddenly have to have checked off all these competencies, although I suspect that you're better, all of you are much more competent at EDS. You just don't think about it. You don't think about the time that you say to the mum of the small person with autism who is a picky eater, so tell me, how's he getting on with his eating and drinking? Were there any issues in school today? That's EDS support work, even if you're not a dysphagia expert.
Thank you, Paula. That's really helpful. I'm just scrolling through the other questions, and there was one question that came in around timing and why we can't do all of it together. Could we review the pre-registration piece with the review of the old competencies? I think the answer is, if we had more time, more resources, and could pause the world, we may well have done that. I think because of circumstance, and I think it's going back to stars aligning piece and money and funding and absolutely resource, I think we need to just see proof of concept. I think we need to see where we are with these competencies as they see fit. I absolutely understand that we need to review the other competencies, because a lot of those I think are out of date and there's a lot of new pieces of work we need to fit together. But I think it is just a matter of timing. And I think because not everybody is going to need the postgraduate stuff, so we need to get it into to core training for every speech and language therapy graduate to be compliant with the MRA. But also I think it's something that's been a very long time in coming, and I think if we're going to deliver holistic care, we need to get that in now. But I agree, had we had the time, we would have paused the whole thing, but we haven't got that luxury. So we think we want to learn from what we're doing in this piece of work, which then maybe make it a quicker process for the next piece when we deliver against the higher grades and higher levels. So I hope that answers that question. There is a question about how many people responded to the consultation in January. I can't give you the exact numbers, but we are aware that whenever we did it, it is in the middle of a pandemic, but we were overwhelmed with the number of people who did respond. We got responses, one of the biggest responses that the college has had for any consultation process. We got them from every clinical area and from every nation. I think that's important because we wanted to make sure that we were capturing all the views of the profession as a whole group. So I hope that answers that question. I'm just looking through to see what else there was that we should be able to manage.
I can hop in with a couple in between drilling bursts, God love him. Yes, we think there's still going to be a need for post-basic dysphagia training because we have a massive workforce that's still interested and people are still changing their jobs or they're moving from adults to pediatrics, vice versa. So yes, that's going to go on. And in fact, one HEI got very excited at the thought of this could be an income generation stream, that there would be more people interested because they'd have had this kind of basic stuff. So the NQP knowledge base, as in anything else, like we still have ongoing courses in AAC, in voice, in all sorts of areas, the NQP comes out like a baby general practitioner with a smattering of lots of things. And that's part of their skill set, is they have a smattering of lots of things that some of us have forgotten about. And then you go on to focus as service needs and personal interests develop. Which leads me into the next question, ASD. I'm hoping that means that autism spectrum disorder. I see it as very much, and that's why we are obsessed with using the term eating, drinking and swallowing and not dysphagia. Dysphagia in too many people's minds is the little biomechanical bit here and the widgets and valves that open and close and worrying about aspiration. Eating, drinking and swallowing issues include everything from seeing food, recognizing food, getting food to this bit here or into the tube here, processing it, and in my opinion, getting it out the far end, but that's for another webinar. So absolutely, the picky eater, the people with the sensory issues, and whether it's adults or children, that's all part of the exposure to supporting someone with a condition that may lead to communication and or eating, drinking and swallowing issues.
Thank you, Paula. We are leafing through them. I can't actually do, there was one question from hello international clinicians. Unfortunately, we would love you to be able to join us on this road, but at the moment this is for UK pre-registration clinicians only, but it is something that we will be taking back to our MRA colleagues, because I think although there is an understanding that we need some parity, I think this is probably us and maybe Republic of Ireland have a very robust system, but a lot of people have embedded all of this EDS within their curriculum. So I suppose the short answer is no, but there's a but and a caveat on that. So I suppose just while I'm thinking about it, something just to think about what we'd like to do longer term with this framework. Bearing in mind the Republic of Ireland have been extremely generous with offering their experiences of how they have embedded their EDS training into their pre-registration curriculum. They took 10 years to do it. So this is not going to be a quick fix and done in a year and a half. This is something that will take time, and that's why I keep saying it's an iterative, evolving process. But where they are now is that they cannot think of a time when EDS was not part of a pre-registration curriculum, and they don't have special measuring devices for it or anything. So ideally, long term, we would like the whole of this program to be subsumed within business as usual. And I think that's why it's quite hard for our international colleagues to almost disaggregate it, because it's so embedded into their pre-registration training already. That's my understanding. I think there is variance between the MRA colleagues. So I think that's a question. It's a really interesting question, but I think short term we are just focusing on UK trained pre-registration students in speech and language therapy, and hopefully there will be some evolution to that over the next decade. They haven't fallen over since, but that's the idea. I hope that helps that question. Paula.
So I'm just getting messages to address a couple of questions here. Are these hours including current placement hours? Yes, that was another thing that the committee was keen on, that we don't add to placement hours. And, you know, I was talking to a lead for a local community trust up here today, and think of, for you folk working in communication, let's say that you don't think you're a dysphagia specialist. Think of all the times and all the little folk and big folk you've supported with the communication side of things, who also have some issues in eating, drinking and swallowing, that you know enough to say, and how is that going? And they report, and you say, oh, well, here's some basic advice, or hang on a sec, I need to get an expert in to support us with that. That's a little bit beyond my area. And that's typical of many aspects of our work, right? But you, in being able to have that very basic conversation and knowing when to refer on, that is EDS clinical work, right? That's what it's all about. And that's the kind of stuff that we're trying to encourage people, practicing clinicians and practice educators, recognizing their own skill set is perhaps a little bit bigger than you even thought it was. So that's one thing. The hours are in normal stuff, and we're not recommending specific EDS placements. No, because we don't see it as a different clinical subtype like voice or, you know, dysarthria. It is an issue that may affect many, many people with many, many communication disorders based on their condition. So that's one question. And then I was asked to look at, hang on a sec, just looking here. When you speak about the requirement for adult hours, how will you ensure this is equitable for learners? Okay, so my response is, how do we do it for anything in communication? We just make sure that people, our students, our learners, get to hang out with real service users and their families who have certain issues. And the breadth of how that happens for an individual learner through an individual HEI across the country, across the 4 nations, is very different. But it's equitable because it's under a sort of global guidance of a speech and language therapist who judges this to be something in communication or whatever area they've asked to look at. And that's okay, and we recognize that, and to be prescriptive about what counts would actually be, it would backfire, and that's why we didn't want to do that.
Thank you. We are just filing through these questions. I think we are, I would actively encourage you to come to our other webinars as well, because I think we are going to go into more detail with some of these issues as well, especially around placement hours and what an hour is. That's really what one of the second webinar is about, which I think will be really positive all round. I think one thing from our point of view is the fact that we are all in this together, and it will be very clear how this will be working very differently. And I think what is going to be a really key positive is to ensure that your local HEIs and your local clinicians work hand in glove. And I know a lot of places do, and I don't want to make it sound like I know they don't, because we know they do. And we have some excellent examples. And I think that's why having the idea about what is face-to-face and what needs to be done or can be done in other ways is maybe very useful, especially if you have clinicians or placements from different parts of the country. So, but you know which ones you need to do as a clinician sitting in a clinic or in a hospital or in a facility, and what can be done in other ways. So I know that you all do have very good links between HEIs and clinical practices, but I think now I'm hoping this will be able to cement it even more, to have those communications around how things are being worked through. And there may be an opportunity to have additional placements around it. And, you know, some students may get more exposure than their minimum hours. And I think that's the other thing. These are minimum hours. If you need to do more hours because you have that opportunity, how lucky is that student? So please, it's a counting thing, but I would hate it to be to minimize. It's an opportunity to maximize opportunities. We know that you do it already, but I'm also very aware there are different ways of delivering that, and that's why having access to the expanding placement guidance will be extremely helpful one way or another. I'm now working out I'm officially really bad at talking and reading. So Paula, did you send me a message, wanted to say something, or I will read your message?
Probably that I think they're drilling to get to Australia in the building next door, which is fantastic. So I've been on mute. I've answered one question in the chat. There are some other things that are kind of not so relevant to this particular discussion, but obviously relevant, and they will be answered. There is going to be a response, and perhaps Judith or one of the other members of the team can explain how the post response and questions work.
Thank you, Paula. Yes, they really are halfway through the Earth's core, and you're next door, aren't they? So absolutely. So any of your questions that haven't been answered today, we will take away and review, and we will send out responses afterwards. We capture all of this. The whole webinar is being recorded. So if you really enjoy it this much, you can watch it again, but I would absolutely encourage your colleagues to watch it if you think that would be valuable and useful to them. We will send out the responses to all the participants on the call. We have your email addresses. I am suggesting that we draw this webinar to a close now, because we are at the beginning of 4 of them. But I would really like to thank you for your time and for your interest and energy in this piece of work. Please don't be strangers. Please do contact us. We would love to continue to work with you. And please do, if you've got any more questions, come to the next webinars, but keep asking. We're only going to do this if we all do it together. And we really look forward to the next trip of this journey and starting to get these students up and running. So thank you all very much for your time. I think you're going to get a poll before you will log off, which we would actively encourage you to do. And we look forward to continuing to work with you. So thank you very much indeed, and goodbye.